Hi, fourth graders, it's Mrs. Bellatash, and I hope you had a great time with the engineering project, designing a knee brace. So when you designed that knee brace, you had a bunch of parts that worked together to make a complete system, the brace. You had sticks, you had the t-shirts, you had a jacket, you had rope, and all of those pieces work together in a system. So today we're going to start looking at a freshwater ecosystem. An ecosystem is another type of a system, right? But usually it's a natural system. It's a system of living and non-living things that work together to make a complete environment. And we're going to look at a freshwater ecosystem. When we start to look at the freshwater environments, I want us to look at really two things. We're going to look at a complete ecosystem, and an ecosystem has plants and animals that live together. So what are the things that animals need? We've talked about it for many years, right? Animals need food, water, air, and shelter. Now you might think fish need air. Well, yes. Fish need air, and they absorb the air that's dissolved in the water. Now, also in freshwater environments, there are plants, and plants have the same needs in the water as they do on Earth. So they need water from the water that they're in. They need sunlight. They need nutrients from the soil and also from the water. They need air. And they need a space. So plants have the same needs if they're growing in a freshwater environment as they do on the surface of the earth. In just a minute, we're going to look at my fish tanks. But before we start that, can you get out your science notebook, turn to the next page, and make sure you put the date. And I'd like the title to be Freshwater Ecosystem. And an ecosystem is a natural system made of parts, living and non-living, that work together. So remember, system means that it's a group of parts that work together, and this is a natural system. And then underneath there, I want you to put fish tank, and I want you to make a T-chart. And I want you to have a list of living environmental factors and a list of non-living environmental factors. So keep a list as we go through and watch the videos of my fish tanks at school. And then we're going to come back to the list and make sure that you have everything that's in the tank that's living and non-living. So here I have a fish tank. And it is a freshwater fish tank, right? There's living environmental factors and there are non-living environmental factors. So let's take a look. Look closely at the fish tank. Start making a list of the things that are living. What is living in this fish tank? And now, what things are not living that are in the fish tank? The fish live in this ecosystem, and all of the environmental factors work together to create a good freshwater ecosystem for the fish. I am going to add a new living environmental factor. This is a small crayfish. Crayfish look kind of like little lobsters, but lobsters only live in salt water. So now we've introduced a new environmental factor to the fish tank. Now, crayfish breathe with gills, so they're just like fish. They breathe with gills. One of the things that crayfish do, which are really great, is that they are bottom feeders. They will eat all of the leftover food that sinks to the bottom of the fish tank. I have a second aquarium in the science lab, and this is a different type of fish. You can see that these fish are very small. These are called guppies, and guppies are full grown. These are not baby fish. These are adult fish. And there are living and non-living environmental factors in this ecosystem. Now, there's a couple of things in this ecosystem that were not in the goldfish ecosystem. So first of all, do you see that there are some plants floating on top? Those are living plants, and they're called Algae. And so they are in the fish tank. A freshwater snail that is there on the side of the fish tank. So we have guppies, which are a fish. We have living plants, and we also have some freshwater snails that are all part of this freshwater ecosystem, a system that all works together. So let's look closely at the fish and see what similarities there are between the two types of fish. So these are the guppies. So what are the structures of the guppies that we can observe? Well, there's eyes, and there's tails, there's fins, there are gills, and all of those structures help the guppies survive. All right, let's take a look at the goldfish. Let's look closely at some of the structures of the goldfish. So, do you notice the goldfish have scales on the outside of their body? And their scales are covered with a kind of a slime that helps the water slide over them. They have gills. The gills are those little cuts on the side of their body, and the water travels over their gills, and then they extract oxygen from it. They have a tail, they have a mouth, they have eyes, and every single one of those structures has a job to do for that animal. And those structures are an important part of the entire ecosystem, right? The fish live in a freshwater ecosystem. They would not do well in a terrarium because that would be land-based. I put some food on the top of the fish tank, and normally fish do not get fed in nature, right? They have to find food on their own. But in our fish tank at school, I provide the source of energy for them, because energy makes things happen. These fish cannot swim around, they cannot reproduce, they cannot live if they don't have food as their source of energy. Here is what I wrote down that I saw in the fish tanks, things that were living and non-living. And if you found some additional ones, fantastic. In terms of the living things, there were the goldfish and the guppies. The crayfish that I put into the fish tank is living. The snails were living. Now, there's some things that we can't see. Algae. Algae is a very small plant. Algae, that was the plant that was floating on top of the guppy tank. Phytoplankton and zooplankton are both microorganisms, very small, but they're really important to the entire ecosystem. And bacteria. We can't see the bacteria, but it's really an important part of the ecosystem. Now, what are some non-living things? Well, the water's not living. The light, the temperature, the rocks. There was a thermometer that was floating in the water. The water filter, the glass fish tank, the decorations, and the shells. And you might have found a couple of other things. So we made a list of living and non-living environmental factors that interact with each other in that freshwater ecosystem, right? Interacting, depending on one another. We're going to be really going into detail about how systems work together. We're going to be looking at food webs and food chains and how different organisms depend on each other. I will see you next week, Cougars.